Australia is having a giant debate about advertising for online gambling companies. You know, the ones that play so often during the footy games that you memorise them word for word. Imagine what you could be buying instead. Imagine what you could be buying instead. The conversation really kicked off back in 2023 when the federal parliament held an inquiry into the harm caused by online gambling and their ads. And in their report, one of the key recommendations was a total phase out of all advertising for online gambling services all across Australia. No more TV ads, no more banner ads on websites, and the Sea Eagles would have to kiss that PointsBet logo goodbye too. The government looked at this report and they said, hey, we're on board. Mostly. While they've yet to officially announce anything, it appears they'll opt for a partial prohibition instead, banning ads on social media and other websites still, but merely limiting when and how many can air on free-to-air TV, plus leaving gambling logos on sports fields and jerseys untouched. Experts have warned that these half measures would be pretty ineffective, but they've still been enough to put the gambling lobby and the TV stations that benefit from that ad revenue on the defensive. Already, we're starting to hear the same talking points repeated again and again and again. If ads for online gambling are banned, it's grassroots community sports clubs that will suffer.
Documents obtained by 9 News claim the AFL would be more than $120 million in the red annually if gambling advertising legislation is passed.
That $120 million figure comes from documents published by the gambling industry, by the way. Given the AFL does have a commitment to invest 10% of all revenue into community footy, that would mean an annual loss of $12 million in funding. But the Victorian state government alone is set to invest around $62 million into community sports clubs in 24-25. It is worth remembering that professional leagues and their money have never been the driving financial force keeping community clubs afloat. Plus, as several experts noted in the inquiry, the tobacco industry made some eerily similar arguments back when they were facing advertising and sponsorship bans in the 70s and 90s. But ultimately, when those bans passed, any funding holes that were created were quickly filled with government support and other commercial sponsorships. If we ban ads for online gambling on TV, well then TV stations will go out of business.
Some of the free-to-air media need gambling ad revenue at any time in order just to stay afloat.
Surprise, surprise, this was a big argument during the tobacco debate too. And look, clearly TV stations survived that fabled ad apocalypse. Then again, I mean, you could argue that, well, they started from a much better financial footing in the 70s, which is why it's lucky that we have a modern day example too. Spain has successfully banned online gambling advertising, and according to their gambling regulator, none of these dire outcomes that the wagering industry predicted actually came to pass. Both free-to-air TV and professional sporting codes adapted and survived. As for Australia,
sports betting is not propping up the industry. The largest sports betting agency in Australia spends on average $65 million a year on television advertising. The largest retail spend in Australia is $200 million a year by Harvey Norman. Well, let's look at Channel 7 as the benchmark. Channel 7 turns over $1.4 billion a year in revenue. Total gambling spend in Australia on the TV networks is $275 million. Of Channel 7's annual turnover, that figure, or their share of it, represents 7% of their annual turnover. So to me, they can make up for it. They can adjust, they can adapt, and they can make up for it.
A total ad ban would just drive consumers towards illegal offshore gambling sites, ones with far fewer protections for punters. The gambling industry claims that this is what's happened in a number of other countries that imposed bans. Countries including Spain. But once again, if you actually ask the Spanish gambling regulator, they'll tell you, yeah, nah, not really. In fairness, the Australian parliamentary inquiry did acknowledge the dangers of illegal offshore gambling, and one of its other recommendations was to crack down on that. But they also found that currently most of the harm caused by gambling came from onshore. And speaking of harm, there is one last element of this debate we should cover, because as many experts have pointed out, a large proportion of online gambling site revenue comes from big gamblers, aka the biggest losers. See, problem gamblers make up just 10% of punters, but they wager more than a third of all bets. So although it is true that, yeah, some of this gambling advertising revenue does go to helping support children's community sport or keeping our TV stations afloat, we have to remember that a lot of that money is coming from people experiencing harm, from those who can least afford to pay for it.